Tonight on Greater Boston from the Boston Public Library. Harvard made a lot of headlines this week when it announced it's putting $100 million toward atoning for its past ties to slavery. But are they headed in the right direction? Robin Rue Simmons, who led the passage of the first government-funded reparations program in the U.S., and Lee Pelton, president and CEO of the Boston Foundation, joined me. And later, two of the local organizers pushing for unionization at Starbucks on the backlash they're seeing against pro-union employees from their higher-ups. Harvard University put before the public this week grim details of its many ties to slavery. Among the findings, over 150 years, dozens of prominent people associated with Harvard, including 4 of its presidents, enslaved more than 70 individuals. Most were black, some were also indigenous. According to the report, some worked and lived on campus where they cared for Harvard presidents and professors and fed generations of Harvard students. Additionally, a significant portion of the school's money in those early days came from donors who profited from slavery into the 19th century. And several of those slaveholders and benefactors with slavery ties are memorialized across the university today. The report also lays out the central role that several key leaders at the school played in propagating so-called race science and eugenics theories that white Americans used for decades to justify the enslavement and marginalization of black people. Today, Harvard's museum collections still hold many artifacts related to those activities, as well as the remains of at least 15 individuals of African descent who may have been enslaved, 2 of whom also had indigenous ancestry. And again, that's just some of what's included in the 130-page plus report compiled by a team of faculty and student researchers appointed by Harvard President Lawrence Bacow in 2019. The report also comes with several recommendations, which Bacow is committing $100 million to implement. I'm joined by Robin Rue Simmons, who led the passage of the first government-funded reparations program in the U.S. in Evanston, Illinois. She's the founder and executive director of FirstRepair, a nonprofit organization that informs local reparations on a national scale and serves on the National African American Reparations Commission. We're also joined by Lee Pelton. Lee's the president and CEO of the Boston Foundation, which has spearheaded its own series of conversations on reparations. I should also note that Lee's on the board of trustees here at GBH and is a Harvard grad who previously served on the board of Harvard Overseers and on several councils and committees related to Harvard's activities. We also invited representatives from Harvard to join us, but they declined. Lee, good to see you. Robin, really good to meet you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Robin,
good to see you.
Robin, starting with you, what's your quick reaction to what you read about Harvard?
I'll tell you, I was just at Harvard, and so I'm aware of the culture there and interest and commitments, reparations. To read it, I was very satisfied, encouraged that they have taken a first step, a lot of work ahead, but making a commitment, uncovering their own egregious history, and committing to doing that important hard work with a $100 million commitment to that. Encouraged.
Lee, were you encouraged?
I was. I thought it was an extraordinary report and a bold report, and it was really searing in its historical criticism of all of what you talked about earlier, and even more than that. So I thought it was a brave effort. It's not new. This whole process began in 2007, actually, and so this is so it's evolved over time.
Robin, you said something like first step, the hard work is to follow. Obviously, that's attempting to make amends. The implementation effort's going to be led by Martha Minow, former head of the law school. How did you decide in Evanston what that next step would be, what some form of reparations would be? What kind of process did you engage in?
Well, in deciding what repair looks like, we really had to hear from the stakeholders, the Black community that have lived through the experience of discrimination in Evanston. And so it was through community process that we moved forward with beginning to prescribe remedy. And first we had to, like Harvard, understand our harm, understand the history of anti-Blackness in Evanston so that we could begin to craft a legal framework, work with our stakeholders to identify and prescribe remedies, and then implement. And so it's been a process that's ongoing. We did pass in 2019, and we continue the work.
And what form, Robin, primarily has reparations taken in Evanston, at least so far?
So far, we have moved forward with a housing initiative. So a $25,000 direct benefit for building wealth through home equity. But we have a commitment of housing, economic development, and educational initiatives in our resolution 126R19.
And, you know, Lee, I mentioned the $100 million commitment, and there's no specific commitment to cash payments. There's a reference to educational opportunities, particularly in the South, some sort of physical memorial. It seems to me that there's a reluctance in lots of these discussions to go the cash payment direction. Should there be that reluctance?
Well, I don't know if there should be. It does, you know, the report does not indicate that there will be direct reparations or financial commitments to students. Only that the implementation committee will now work to move from recommendations to actions. And the recommendations are really very, the specifics of many of the recommendations are really broad and large and extensive in their scope. And if I have one worry about the report and the recommendations, it's whether or not Harvard has, set out to do more than it can possibly do, especially given, the amount of money that they have to work with.
You know, I want to step back from Harvard, if I can, for a minute. The hope is that Harvard becomes a leader on some front, but there's a lot of convincing, Robin and Lee, that seems to me needs to happen. There was a national poll conducted by UMass Amherst and WCVB not too long ago. And again, this is about cash payments in particular. Do you think the federal government should make cash payments to the descendants of slaves? As you see, 61% no, 38% yes. This is in December of last year. And then they broke it down by race. White respondents, 28% yes. Black respondents, 84% yes. Even, to use your term, Robin, if people begin to understand the history of anti-blackness in this country, there's a long way to go to get to the point where the average American is convinced that some amends needs to be made for that. Would you not agree?
I agree, but I remain encouraged that we're seeing even more support for reparations. We're seeing the support in Congress with HR 40 having more co-sponsors than ever. So I agree that we have a long way to go.
And what have you done, by the way, and President Biden, I believe, is the first president to ever sign on to anything around reparations, specifically that commission, that committee. What have you done in Evanston to crack people's minds open to which weren't open before?
Absolutely. So President Biden hasn't signed on yet. He has said he supports the study. So we are hoping to see an executive order possibly. But what we did in Evanston was really lead with our values. Our values in Evanston stated that we are in support of equity. We want everyone to enjoy the same livability and standard of life. We want to repair our past. And we had to do that with a tangible legislative action that could result with measurable outcomes, and that was reparations. And so not only did I share it's in line with our values, but also how reparations would support and uplift the entire city. And there was a great report done, the cost of segregation report, that was modeled on Chicago, and I was able to use that as a reference on what would be possible for Evanston.
You know, Lee, I know you're engaged in this discussion intensely in the Boston Foundation. I'm almost embarrassed to say these words, but this is what one hears from, I think, the no's on these polls is, what do I have to do with this? Why should I be contributing? I think in Evanston, it's cannabis sales tax revenue. Why should I contribute in any way to making amends, to repairing this? I had nothing to do with it. What does one say to that voice?
Well, first of all, the first thing to say, and I know Robin knows this very well, that reparations can take many forms. It could be rehabilitation, restitution, compensation, a kind of reconciliation like in South Africa many years ago with the guarantee that these harms will never be repeated. But the first thing that one must do is to acknowledge the structural systemic sources that led to these inequities that many folks, especially folks of color, still labor under today. And so I think, so what we need to remind people, this is not personal. This is not about you. You're not at fault here. This is about that we got here. It's not by accident. It is not by accident. And so this is the nation, organizations responding to national acts of racism and racialized discrimination.
You know, in terms of making the connection, I think I didn't mention this in the summary of the Harvard's findings. I thought one thing that was very helpful, Robin, was they mentioned that the legacy of slavery at our school, meaning at Harvard, continued into the 1960s. I may have the numbers slightly off, but they talk about 9 black men being in the freshman class of 1,200, and they go on to say, and that number 9 is pathetically small, those are my words, not theirs, is much higher than the number in the prior several decades. That's pretty powerful stuff, isn't it?
Absolutely. And we know that, although there have been laws that have been outlawed, we still see the legacies of slavery that are being passed down in contemporary and modern forms of anti-Blackness. And so it is powerful that they have dug into their own history and are being transparent. And I hope that other institutions will follow their lead.
Lee, I only have a minute or so left for each of you. I think that's a really important point. The legacy in 2022, I think if you were to stop the average person in the street, I'm not sure they'd be able to identify it. Can you identify it a bit for them?
The legacy of
slavery today.
Slavery. Oh, I see. Well, we could look at that from home ownership and the and all of the things that have happened over generations that have prevented certain folks, particularly folks of color, from having home ownership. We can look at the wealth gap nationally. It's a 10-to-1 ratio nationally here. In our city, at $250,000 for white residents and $8 for Black residents. That did not happen by accident. And slavery is part of it, but it's not the only part of it. There are other kinds of actions that were taken by governments and banks and appraisals of homes and so on and so forth that contributed to where we are today.
Robin, I only have a few seconds left. Can Harvard, considering the bully pulpit it has, can that serve as a model for other institutions if they get it right?
Absolutely. And I think they noted in their report, I think I heard Lee say that they're not the first, but it is Harvard University. And they have made a huge statement. I think it should be a call to action to other institutions, academic institutions, as well as other institutions to begin their road to repair. Everyone is responsible.
Robin Rue Simmons, it's wonderful to meet you, and thanks for your work. Lee Pelton, great to see you as always. Thanks for your thoughts, both of you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Up next, when 2 Starbucks locations in Buffalo, New York officially voted to unionize their stores, that was back in December, it kicked off a wave of unionizing efforts at locations across the country. Less than 5 months later, employees at around 200 Starbucks cafes in more than 30 states have taken steps to form a union, including 16 right here in Massachusetts. 2 of those locations, one in Allston and one in Brookline, have already held official votes, and 5 of them are set to vote on union efforts next month. But those efforts have not come without losses. Starbucks has been accused of firing several workers who've been pushing union efforts. And as GBH's Tori Bedford has reported, here in Massachusetts, workers are being driven to quit due to hours being cut, increases in write-ups, and constant pressure from upper management about the supposed dangers of unionization. Pressure which appears to come from the very top, because while founding CEO Howard Schultz, who returned to the position earlier this month, has long pegged himself as a, quote, friend to his employees, recently he had this to say to his managers about his friends looking to unionize.
And now a new outside force that's trying desperately to disrupt our company. My faith and confidence in the future of Starbucks is based on my faith and confidence in you, not some outside force that's going to dictate or disrupt what we are.
I'm joined now by Khylah Clay, one of the lead organizers for the statewide Starbucks Workers Union United Movement, and Julia Berkman, an organizer for a Starbucks store in Waban. We also invited Starbucks to send a representative to join us. They declined, but they sent this statement. We are listening and learning from the partners in these stores, as we always do across the country. From the beginning, we've been clear in our belief that we're better together as partners without a union between us, and that conviction has not changed. We respect our partners' right to organize and are committed to following the NLRB process. Khylah, Julia, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Khylah, starting with you, why'd you decide unionization was a good idea for your workplace?
Well, personally, I didn't have a lot of knowledge about unions prior to beginning this process at my store, but it was really seeing what was happening in Buffalo that got us to first look into this. Seeing how corporate was responding to the efforts over there and how quickly they had started their union busting campaign was very alarming for us. And so that was when we started looking into it and realizing that this whole time we've never had a voice in the company that we work for. And that's really what has been the rallying cry for all of us is we just want a voice in our company.
How about you, Julia?
Yes, I think for me, I've been with Starbucks for almost 11 years.
Wow.
And it was really an eye-opener when I received a raise, but the raise I received only led to my making approximately $1 more than new people that were hired. But it wasn't just about that for me personally. It was also about wanting to have democracy in the workplace and wanting to have a voice in terms of wages, in terms of seniority, and in terms of how well staffed shifts are, and just in terms of having a voice in our workplace environment in general for both new hires and for people who have been with the company for a long time like myself.
And we should say, by the way, in Kylah's location, Alston, they won a union vote. And in Julia's location in Waban, they filed for an election, which will happen in May. Khylah, Howard Schultz, as I said, came back. He said other things, like we must continue to earn the trust of our people and our customers every day. He obviously has a strange way of doing it, because here's what he said to a fellow barista in Long Beach, California, attempting to unionize. Quote, if you hate Starbucks so much, why don't you go somewhere else? Khylah, do you hate Starbucks?
I found that comment by Howard to be completely insulting, because the people who are putting in hours and hours of work to organize their workplace are clearly not doing it because they hate their job. They're doing it because they are dedicated to their job. And that's how I feel. I love my job. I love my customers. I love my coworkers in the store that I get to work at. But I think we can make it better. And I think that takes listening to the partners first.
You know, Khylah, you have a coworker who I think loves her job too. I looked at the LinkedIn account for you, Julia, and you said, I love making lattes, working alongside an amazing staff, and serving customers. I'm with Khylah. It doesn't get much more insulting to suggest that if people aren't happy at a workplace, the boss tells them, why don't you quit and go somewhere else? What was your reaction to what Schultz had to say?
Me?
Yeah, Julia.
I found it very insulting, and it really doesn't reflect the attitude of my coworkers at all. I love my coworkers. I feel like they're my family, and I love my customers. I've known some of them for, about a decade, and I've seen their kids grow up and go off to college. I know their dogs. I know what they do for a living.
That's great.
And sometimes, when our store was closed, I missed them. So I see it as very legitimate and positive to want to improve your workplace and stay doing work that you like with people you like.
Khylah, I'm interested from both of you to see what kind of blowback you've gotten from the employer, from corporate, as you call it, or these support managers, I guess, support partners. One of your colleagues is quoted in the Boston Globe, Khylah, saying, a support partner saying to her, if I were in your position, I'd be scared. What kind of tactics, what kind of message have you gotten from the employer, or did you get from the employer during your organizing effort, Khylah?
And unfortunately, that's a very common tactic that they've been using. Working with all of the different stores that have filed to petition or filed their petitions to unionize here, I've heard a lot of really egregious conduct by corporate. But specifically at my store and the other store in Coolidge Corner were both of the first two to file. And so being in December when the campaign was still early, they really focused a lot of their resources on listening sessions and sending their vice president of the region to our store, the regional directors, and holding these captive audience sessions where they would essentially feed us anti-union propaganda and tell us what they believe is best for us.
Captive audience meaning you had no choice but to go. They're mandatory attendance meetings, right?
Right. However, the problem with that was they actually later on said that they weren't mandatory, but in the early phases, they never gave us direct language as to whether it was required or not. And then we were told if we didn't attend the store meetings, then we would have to go and have a one-on-one or a two-on-one with our manager and district manager.
Sort of sounds like mandatory to me, I should
Yeah.
say. You know, Khylah, had you ever seen these people from corporate before you decided you wanted a union?
No, actually, I had never met the regional vice president prior. Our district manager was recently hired, but I hadn't met him either until we had filed. And our regional director, I had actually met her once, but she had spent the past several months union busting in Buffalo, so we hadn't seen her for a while.
And Julia, what kind of experience have you and your colleagues had leading up to your, I think it's your vote is in early May. How have you been treated by the employer?
I'm really not exactly sure why, but it's been milder in fashion at my store. I do really admire and like my manager, both personally and professionally, though he did hold some one-on-one sessions with some coworkers, and I was there that day, although he hasn't held one with me yet, and he's told me that he respects the process, but I did overhear parts of those sessions, and people were being told that you may not be able to transfer to another store. You may not be able to cover at another store. In Canada, the stores that unionized receive lower wages. One coworker was told that she may not be able to receive as many hours, and she was very concerned about that after her one-on-one session. And also the main thing is that our hours have been cut, and that started around the time that we started passing out unionizing cards to petition to unionize. And it's just been across the board for senior partners and new people being hired to work full time, being given 20 hours a week. I mean, I was getting 26 hours a week, then it went down to 20, then 11. Now for a couple weeks, I'm scheduled around 13, and I'm going to be speaking with my manager tomorrow about having at least 20 so I can maintain my benefits, and I have found another part-time job in addition.
Julia, I want to be clear. When they cut your hours, I want to follow up on what you just said. When they cut your hours below 20, you've only worked there 11 years. When they cut your hours below 20, you're no longer entitled to benefits from the company?
That is a possibility. I know that over the pandemic, they changed it so that because people weren't being scheduled as much, so that if you worked maybe around like 15 a week that you could, and I could maybe use vacation and sick time.
I see.
And
I see.
And also my availability has lessened. It's more so just not knowing,
Understood.
how many hours I'm going to be scheduled for, and not knowing if it's because of the unionization. And at my store, I noticed there was someone who was actually skeptical of the unionization process, and her hours were cut as well. So I haven't seen that at my store. It's just the uncertainty and the unsafe feeling of not knowing how many hours I'm going to be scheduled for, and not necessarily knowing why, and wondering now, is it because our mail-in ballot election is going on right now, and I'm one of the people who started the effort at our store. And that's one of the really important reasons why the unionization effort is so important.
Understood. Well, it's good that Howard Schultz is your friend. You can imagine what he'd be if he wasn't your friend. You know, very quickly, before we leave, Khylah, you first, then Julia, what do you want customers who support what you're doing and support you to do? Do you want them to boycott the Starbucks, reach out to corporate, as you call it? Khylah first. What do you want supporting customers to do?
Well, keep doing what you're doing, which is, being our friends, being our community, and showing up and showing that support. Some of the ways that we've seen some support too is customers ordering on mobile with the name Union or Union Strong.
That's great.
And partners really love that. It really perks them up. I mean, some of their days can be very difficult with all the surveillance from corporate folks going on. So that's one big way. Another big way too is as opposed to just boycotting, connect with some of the partners there and learn more about their efforts. And you might find that each store will have different needs. Some stores may want to be boycotted, others certainly may not.
Julia, quickly, what do you want supporting customers to do?
I would say don't boycott. I think we want to see them. We like seeing them.
And their dogs.
I did have a customer who wrote an email to Howard Schultz saying that he supported our efforts and that he thinks that unionizing would strengthen our store. And also, customers can post things or repost things on social media.
Great.
And they could also make a positive sign, a pro-union sign, and put it on the community board. And even just come and talk to us about it.
That's great. Khylah Clay, Julia Berkman, I wish you both a lot of luck, and thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
That's it for tonight. Please come back tomorrow for Talking Politics. Adam Riley and his panel will take up Diane Wilkerson floating a State House comeback nearly 15 years after her extortion conviction. Plus, the Democratic race for AG is heating up, and legal sports betting is nearing the finish line on Beacon Hill. But will it ever actually cross it? That and more tomorrow at 7. And please be sure to join me and Marjorie Egan tomorrow at 11 on Boston Public Radio, live once again right here at the Boston Public Library. Boston Medical Center's Dr. Catherine Gergen Barnett will join us for Ask the Doctor. We'll also get a performance from the members of the Handel and Haydn Society and artistic director Harry Christophers, who's taking his bow after 13 years transforming the organization. Thank you so much for watching. Please stay safe.